All I saw was that it had Vladimir Guerrero on there, which is the premier trade target for not just the Seattle Mariners, but probably most teams in baseball that need a hitter.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious to hear where you're going with this.
Sure. So he's the guy everyone wants. Vladimir Guerrero, son of Vladimir Guerrero Sr. He's Vladimir Guerrero Jr., first baseman for the Toronto Blue Jays. He's had 2 straight years that are like short of what I would call dominant. I think his actually I would say 3 straight years short of what I would call dominant. I think he's in at least the tier below dominant, if not 2 tiers below being a dominant hitter. His power has really dropped the last 2 years. His he's maintained we've talked about him a lot in a previous episode, so I don't want to dig too deep into him. His projection for the rest of this year is a little better than he's been, but he also now has 2 straight years, 2.5 seasons worth of plate appearances just about, of being like this kind of like tier 3 hitter. He doesn't provide any defensive value. He is young, but one of the things that makes him unattractive to me, and I'm going to tell you, him and Bo Bichette, I kind of feel this way about both of them. These are the 2 big, I think, the most exciting targets for teams out there. The thing that makes Vladimir Guerrero less exciting to me is that people always say, like, oh, you get this opportunity like Luis Castillo. You could trade these prospects, but you might get to like re-sign or sign Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to an extension. First off, that's not necessarily guaranteed. I also think like trading a ton of I think Luis Castillo is great. Trading a bunch of prospects and then giving top dollar is like compounded cost, not reducing the cost. It doesn't reduce the burden, right? Like that's, and I know all the arguments that people were giving, like you'll never think about the prospects. I can't even name you the prospects that the Mariners traded for Luis Castillo. He's been great. There's no doubt about that. That's certainly true, but they're also paying him like a top end.
That trade, it's interesting. The Luis Castillo trade. Sorry to interrupt, but the guys that they gave up have actually the Mariners. I mean, if you thought the Mariners won the trade on the day that they made it, I mean, you certainly think they won the trade. Now they traded Noel V. Marte. That was kind of the key to the trade. He's currently serving an 80-game suspension for PED use. It's about to be over in a couple weeks, but that's never a good start and never a good sign because you just don't know how a guy's going to come back from a PED suspension. How long was he using? Did he become a good prospect because he was using? Who knows? Sure. One of the other guys, Brandon Williamson, starting pitcher, is staring down the barrel of a season-ending surgery this year. I mean, not that you root for anybody to have those types of issues, but he's been up. He came up last year, I believe, for his debut and has been like okay, not great as a starter since he debuted. So, for the fans who really want a team to hold on to prospects, I remember the reaction to the Luis Castillo trade was mixed. It was mixed. Sure. I mean, the day that it happened, there were people who were upset that they gave up Marte because they thought Noel V. Marte was either going to be the shortstop or the third baseman in the future, depending on where you thought he would end up. And there were guys out there, there's always the fans, the amateur scouts who they skip right past Noel V. Marte and they're like, Brandon Williamson is the next ace of this staff, and it's like they're upset about that. And he's proving to be a fringe back end of the rotation starter when he's healthy. So a lot of these guys that they gave up, it doesn't seem like that trade is going to bite them anytime soon. Now, obviously, there's still a lot of future ahead of some of these guys, but it's just a good example of how giving up some of these prospects.
Kind of clear about that. Brandon Williamson was in the Jesse Winker, Eugenio Suarez trade.
Oh God, we made so many trades with Cincinnati. I completely fucked that one up.
So that's fine. So,
Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But I think your point is correct, which is these trades have a lot of volatility. There's also like a ton of examples of the Mariners trading. Like the most classic Mariners trade is the 4 Heathcliff Slocum, Derek Lowe, and Jason Varitek, like 2 fringe Hall of Fame candidates, basically, for a guy who was a pretty shitty. Well, actually, it wasn't even. He was pretty good. I think it was 94 or 95, but he was pretty good that year. But obviously, like, doesn't turn into the amount of value. My problem with Vladimir Guerrero specifically is I am not I don't think I want the Mariners to extend or give a big contract to in free agency Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I think it's going to fall apart. I think he's got the same problems physically that Prince Fielder had. I think this dude in 5 years, when he's 30 years old, he's probably going to command like a 10-year, $300 million contract. That's what we're looking at for contracts these days. When this dude's 30, he may be a negative value player, like a negative WAR player at a point. And I genuinely think it's going to fall apart. Bo Bichette, the one thing I will say about Bo Bichette, the reason I feel that about Guerrero, by the way, is like his weight and his constantly reducing power. His power has gone down 4 straight years. It started at an incredibly high point. 2021, he hits 48 home runs, 290 isolated power, 166 WRC plus. He's a 6-win player as a guy with no defensive value. That's great. That's, one of the best hitters in the league. And he's consistently, his power has dropped every year. Yeah, and that's bad from a guy who keeps gaining weight, by the way. Like when you gain weight and lose power, these are like, is he going to be Pablo Sandoval in a couple years?
Yeah, I mean, this has always been the concern with Vlad, is his size.
Sure.
And when you watch him swing the bat, I mean, he swings the bat as violently, if not more so, than Julio Rodriguez, who has a very violent swing.
Sure.
But the difference is Julio Rodriguez is, in good shape. His body can conceivably support a swing that hard for at least a while longer. I mean, I think any guy who has a real violent swing, you kind of see them, if they're good players, they generally adjust as they get older, and that swing becomes a little less violent. Vladimir Guerrero Sr. is a good example of a guy who was able to kind of carry out a real violent swing for quite a long time. But most of those guys have to adjust because your body just can't go through and do that every single day as you get older.
Yeah.
For Vlad Jr., I mean, man, here's the thing about him. I mean, Toronto said they're not going to trade him after all. I don't know exactly what prompted these rumors that they were looking to trade Guerrero and Bichette, other than the fact that they aren't playing very well this year. And both those guys would bring in huge returns in trade. Like, no matter how you feel about Guerrero or Bichette, if you were to go steal them from Toronto, you're going to have to give up a ton in the way of prospects to do it. So it makes a ton of sense. If you're Toronto and you think, hey, we're going nowhere for the next couple of years with these guys, now's our chance to get out from under them and get a big haul in return. I mean, it makes sense that you would want to deal them, but both Guerrero and Bichette are young still. Personally, I definitely hear what you're saying, the concerns with Vlad Jr., but, a year or two ago, people saw him as a top 10 player in the game of baseball with a bright future ahead.
Yeah, but then he's put up 2.5 years of mediocre.
I understand that. Yeah,
not even totally mediocre, by the way, because he's been a well above average hitter. He just provides value nowhere else, and the part of his game that's declining.
Yeah,
and obviously his defensive value is declining because he moved across the diamond and he doesn't play a great first base. But he's also, I mean, it's declining on all fronts.
Yeah, the example I'll give you here, the name I'll give you, is of a Hall of Famer who had, I think, a very similar trajectory as Vlad Jr., and Vlad is at the same turning point that this guy came to when his original team gave up on him, and that's Miguel Cabrera. Miguel Cabrera came up at 20 years old with the Marlins in 2003, and, he was like Vlad. He kind of had that baby fat on him. He's still young enough that his body is not really developed maybe the way that you'd expect a major leaguer's body to be developed. And then, a couple years later, Miguel has kind of ballooned a little bit. He started to eat and drink his way out of productivity. And the Marlins got worried about him. The Marlins, being the way that they are, they were probably always going to trade a guy like Cabrera anyway. But at the time, there were real concerns with how he was going to develop. And ultimately, they give up on him. They send him to Detroit. And, who knows what triggered all of it, but he turns his body around and he turns his career around. And he's obviously productive enough to become the future Hall of Famer that we know today. That's kind of where Vlad's at right now. Vlad is at a point where, like, if he really dedicates himself to, getting in shape, having that, nutrition and that body that you need to be a player every single day, then maybe he can follow that same path as Cabrera, because we know he's ultra talented. That's not there's no question about that. He's ultra talented. So for me, I look at a potential trade for Vlad Guerrero, if that were to materialize, as like, I would absolutely do it 100%. I don't think, just knowing the types of guys that the Mariners have, unless you're like overpaying to go get a guy like Vlad, I'd be okay with almost any.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think that's a question too, because the Mariners have, you and I talked about this on the golf course of all places. I want to say real quick, Miguel Cabrera, his best power hitting season, like by isolated power, was the last year in Florida. Every year he was there, he had a better year. He's like, it was a different offensive time. It's 2003 through 2007. So his like WRC plus, which compares him to league average, looks worse, but he was having a great career in Florida.
I mean, he was, but I remember the discourse. Yeah, it was a huge, there were articles written about how he wasn't, he was kind of at a breaking point.
Sure.
And they just didn't know how he was going to develop further. And it feels like that's a lot of the conversation.
He never played a single inning of first base. He didn't play a single inning of first base in Florida.
Yeah,
he played third base.
Outfield,
yeah, exactly. So that's to me, like, I understand the comparison. I think it's a very good comparison. Before I shit on it, I think it's a very good comparison. We talked about it. I'm like totally fine with the Mariners getting rid of Harry Ford. I think that, one, catchers are very difficult to develop. Young catchers take a long time to get there. A lot of times we'll see guys either scuffle for like most of their arbitration years, and then you find a guy like a Cal Raleigh, who, like, I guess I actually probably should kind of figure out what happened with Cal Raleigh that made Cal Raleigh a good catcher, because I don't remember him being at the top of a bunch of lists. I could be wrong actually about that. I'm gonna look that up right now. But first off, I don't buy into any of the stuff where it's like, well, the Mariners have a shortstop, so they don't need a shortstop. You can never have enough shortstops, because shortstops become. By the way, Miguel Cabrera, I believe, spent time in the farm as a shortstop. Albert Pujols was a shortstop. Like, shortstops become third baseman, second baseman, center fielders, left fielders. That's an athletic peak to start at that allows you to fall down the defensive ladder. When you have a guy that's a first base only at 22, 23 years old, that's a problem. Like, that is a worry. And I'm not talking about Vlad specifically, but I'm saying, like, Colt Emerson, like, these guys, the Mariners have J.P. Crawford. They have a lot of middle infield prospects. Those guys, one, they're not all going to stick in the middle infield. Two, we see it all the time. Like, you need depth at all positions. So maybe you don't get this, like, anointed next Ken Griffey Jr. guy at next Alex Rodriguez guy at one of those positions, but you have organizational depth so that when J.P. Crawford, tears a hamstring next year or something like that, hopefully it's not J.P. Crawford and hopefully it's not a torn hamstring, but you have a guy that you can plug into that spot. In general, I am one of these people who doesn't want the team to make big prospect moves for guys, but if there's a guy that if there's positions that I'm willing to trade, catcher's high on that list, because I think it's nearly impossible to develop a catcher and make him a good hitter and a good fielder before the end of his arbitration years.
Yeah, the dealing of Harry Ford, I think there's been enough smoke with Harry Ford that the Mariners want to trade this guy. Like, there's been enough people that are informed and close to the team that have talked about the Mariners potentially trading Harry Ford, that's a name that's being thrown around. And, Harry Ford's a great prospect. He's, top 100 guy. He played in the World Baseball Classic for Great Britain and kind of like made a little bit of a name for himself there. So, even if you're not a Mariner fan, you might know who Harry Ford is because of the World Baseball Classic. And you're right. Catchers in general can be tougher to develop offensively, certainly. And I think, the Mariners have a guy in Cal where it's like, when you do have one catcher already, if you can secure that guy for the long run, then you're probably set for a while. The interesting thing, for all the crap we give the Mariners organization on some of the things they say, I mean, when they say stuff like we have a shortstop in JP, we don't need another one, or stuff like that. I mean, I don't actually think that they are dumb enough to believe those things that they're saying. They're spinning discourse so that fans will give them the benefit of the doubt. Sure. And where it becomes a problem is when you get those fans kind of regurgitating the things that the organization says, because they truly believe they're taking these things at face value, which, for some people, like, you have to take them at face value because that's the type of person you are. But you got to know that a lot of the things that the guys like Jerry DiPoto say, Justin Hollander, or whomever, it's spin. It's organizational spin. Sure. To pump up your players, to make lemonade out of the lemons that maybe you're dealing with. And that's kind of what they have to do. So, these guys are used car salesmen to some degree. When it comes to like the prospects that the Mariners could be trading, I mean, all of these guys, most of the highly touted prospects they have are pretty young still. Sometimes every now and then you'll hear about like, good example is Adam Jones. When the Mariners traded Adam Jones and a whole cast of characters for Eric Bedard and watch that blow up in their face. The difference between the prospects the Mariners have now and Adam Jones back then is that Adam Jones was ready to be in the major leagues every single day. He'd already come up and played some games with the Mariners. So you were talking about a guy who was major league ready when you dealt him. There are very few of the guys that the Mariners have as prospects now that are being rumored as, potential trade targets for other teams that are close to being major league ready. So if you're holding on to a Cole Young or a Colt Emerson or even a Harry Ford, you're talking about making your team better 2, 3, 4 years down the road. 2 is aggressive for some of these guys. Young and Emerson, 18 years old, they're realistically 4 years away. So, if you look at Julio, a guy like Julio, and you don't want to waste his peak years, do you really want to wait 4 more years to surround him with the potential talent? Not even, I wouldn't even say talent, because you don't know yet. The potential talent that he might need to kind of fill out a lineup and win a World Series? Or do you want to capitalize on the arms that you have now, go get a bat to support them, and also help out Julio along the way? I mean, this is the type of predicament teams find themselves in every year this time of year when you get to midseason and you're actually a good team. And the difference between maybe the last couple years and this year is the Mariners are starting to pull away a little bit in the West, to the point where it's like, if they have the inside track to win the AL West, great. That's great. That means you are assuring yourself of a playoff spot. But I don't think anyone could objectively look at the Mariners right now and say, they have a lineup that's going to allow them to win games in a postseason series, because we've watched their pitching be susceptible to really good hitting teams against Kansas City and Baltimore recently, and at the same time we know that their hitters have struggled all throughout the year. So they're starting to put things together a little bit right now and certainly playing a little bit better, but they have to start thinking about not just winning in the second half of the season, but winning in the playoffs. And that's kind of where you really kind of start to look at, okay, who can we deal from our farm system to go get the bat that we need to really support this lineup?
Right. So let's talk about those bats, because there's, I guess my problem is, so there's 3 guys that have been like the constant topic for trades. It's those 2 guys, Bichette, who really he's not really a great fit for the Mariners. He's only ever played shortstop in his career. He's a guy that like profiles, his bat certainly profiles at third base or second base. The Mariners have kind of a uniquely good thing that they need. They basically could fit in another upgrade at any infield spot, first base, third base, second base, just not shortstop pretty much. J.P. Crawford is the guy. He's a very good shortstop. They have like a full season worth of at-bats probably available to an outfield upgrade, and a full season of at-bats available to a DH. Like that, so there's really no place they could go wrong except for trading for Bichette. He's the guy of the Luis Robert, Bo Bichette, and Vladimir Guerrero, like that group of guys. Bo Bichette's the guy I like the most. I think Robert makes the most sense because I think there's the most upside. He's controllable for longer, et cetera, et cetera. My problem is any one of those guys, you're going to have to give up a ton of those prospects, and they all come with like significant problems. We talked about Guerrero quite a bit. Obviously, Robert's been injured a large chunk of his career. I want to talk about some guys that I think you could get that would produce at the same level in the short term. They would give you the same short-term benefit that you're talking about. Like, go out and get guys who are good now for Julio Rodriguez, for Logan Gilbert, for Luis Castillo to be able to hopefully push this team into a deep postseason run, and would cost, I think, significantly less. I've also heard people say, well, if the Mariners, why would they be willing to spend money now if they weren't willing to spend money in the offseason? Well, the answer is because what they're investing in now is something significantly more of a sure thing than what they had in the offseason. They didn't know for sure that this was going to be a team that was this good. And I will say my reason for not being super into giving up a bunch of prospects is because I have serious doubts that this team can actually make a postseason run. But if you're going to do it, I think like we talked about Rayleigh earlier. That's like a low cost acquisition that was very good. And the Mariners have an opportunity, I think, if they're willing to take on a little bit of salary, which they might be willing to now because it's a more sure thing. They're probably going to have more attendance to offset the cost of that salary for the rest of the season. There's some guys that I think fit that mold that are like DH, outfield, middle infielder, third baseman, first baseman in one of those spots.
So basically all positions but shortstop.
That's what I'm saying. It's like they really can pick the like best value option. And I think with like, here's my question. You take a guy, Harry Ford, this high ranking prospect. You go to the New York Mets. Everyone's talking about Pete Alonso. I'm fine with, by the way, I'd be thrilled if they traded for Pete Alonso. I think Pete Alonso is going to cost more than either of the guys that I'm going to tell you about. JD Martinez, Starling Marte. These guys are both projected to and have historically produced at a level similar to what Vlad Guerrero has given you the past couple seasons. They're both JD Martinez is 36 years old. He's on a 1-year, $12 million deal. So let's say you take on the rest of that salary. Starling Marte has 2 years left at like I think $20 million a year ish. These aren't like, you may not sign these guys to these contracts now, but the point is you get to what you end up spending is like what should have been this year's free agent dollars you spend in the middle of the season and acquire two guys theoretically. I don't know if you offer them Harry Ford, a top prospect, and salary relief, these two mid-30s outfielders that are probably not going to be Mets for much longer. I think you might be able to get both those guys plus a reliever. If you give them Harry Ford, you might have to offset it so that it doesn't look so bad for them. You might have to throw in 3 non-prospects to get those players over. Being willing to take on salary, you can acquire talent much cheaper. And to me, that's a smarter move. I'm going to throw out some other names, and you can stop me at any point.
Yeah, on those two, I would just say, yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. I mean, I think those guys are going to be fairly cheap. The thing about the Mets is, money doesn't matter to the Mets. They've proven that. They have one of the richest owners in the sport, and they don't seem to mind spending money. So what the Mets will probably be most enticed by in a trade is effectively buying prospects.
Sure.
So they're going to want prospects from a team like the Mariners if they're giving up anybody, and they're going to be willing to take on the player's salary, their veteran player's salary to get those prospects. And knowing the Mariners, that's usually an attractive move. The Mariners don't mind saving money wherever they can. So I could see that working. Now, the JD Martinez, I think, is an interesting one. I mean, he's strictly going to be a DH, but he's a guy that always produces. Mm-hmm. Marte, I'm not as sold on Marte. Marte has been really unhealthy. He's been injury riddled for the past few years. And I think, we have a Marte at home. And that's Mitch Haniger. So, Mitch is not, he doesn't produce at the level that Starling Marte does, certainly at this point in his career. But, between the two of them, you're not getting a whole lot of production just every day in the lineup because you just don't know if you can count on those guys.
I mean, first off, Marte's played 59 games this year. He's been relatively healthy this year. And I think, I think that part of the deal is you don't know if you're going to get that out of Vladimir Guerrero because he's declining. Like so far this year.
I mean, he's declining, but he shows up every day. I mean, I don't think there's any questions about his durability. Even if you think he's like getting to the point where he's out of shape, he has been durable up to this point. There's nothing that would would set some sort of precedent that you'd have to worry
sure.
about his durability. Yeah.
I think the thing about this team is I don't think this offense is one Vladimir Guerrero Jr. away. I think they need help at all all those positions I talked about. I think you need an outfielder, a middle infielder, maybe a third baseman. Like Josh Rojas has started to cool off a fair amount. Ty France is essentially a replacement level first baseman at this point. And Mitch Garver is like not a great DH. Like you have there's 5 positions that you can reasonably acquire, and I think it's good because you can acquire just the best value, but also you probably need to acquire more than one guy to really fill these guys out.
Yeah.
I would be fine with Marte, understanding the risk, whether New York pay. I think you get a discount based on that risk, and I'm completely fine with that. Mark, and I always is it Canna?
Mark Canna, yeah.
Mark
Canna is a guy who's for years felt like he should be a Mariner.
Yeah, he's like the spiritual sequel to Mark Trumbo, in my opinion. I think I might have said that on this podcast before. He makes a ton of sense to me. He's a decent hitting outfielder / DH. He's a guy who, or what is he playing mostly now? I guess he's playing some first base now too.
Yeah, he's moved around a lot, but his primary position is in the outfield. He's a very versatile guy.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'd be fine
for years. We saw him with the Oakland A's for years, and
Sure.
He's like perfectly fine. Like if he is the second bat you acquire, you're happy. You know, if you go make a trade for the big bat that you really need, and then you supplement that by going out and getting a guy like Canna, then yes, your team is certainly going to be better for it. And because he's a veteran, you're just going to have you can count on that production down the stretch.
Tyler O'Neill, former Mariner, is a guy that's probably available. So Canna's in the final year of a 3-year deal, by the way. I think his salary is around $12 million. Tyler O'Neill is in, I think, his final year of arbitration, $5.85 million. He's 28 years old. He's been an up and down player, but he's playing pretty well this year in Boston with like kind of some underlying peripherals to support it. It's not a guy who's just a flash in the pan. Maybe it doesn't. I think another thing that we got to realize too is some of these guys may come to Seattle, and I worry about Vlad Guerrero coming to Seattle, and it just absolutely like coming to the ground because Seattle just kills hitters. It seems like.
Yeah.
I'll move on to some more guys. Brian Reynolds is a guy who's been rumored to be like a Mariners front office favorite for years. He's signed to a long-term deal. You never know. It seems like Pittsburgh is always on the verge of a rebuild. So he's a guy who's like pretty good. He's controlled through 2030. At 29 years old, like that's a little bit scary. That means you got him under contract until he's like 36 years old, but it's at really a cheap salary. Average value is like $13 million. I'm sure it escalates in the later years, but he's a guy that you may be able to, because he's got this long-term commitment. You may be able to get him for not that much of a prospect haul.
Yeah, Reynolds is one of those guys that people really, really like Brian Reynolds, and every time I watch him play, I'm like, yeah, I get it, because like he plays hard, he kind of does a little bit of everything. You know, he's fast, he's not a real big power guy, but he can still hit for a little bit of power. You know, like he kind of does everything. He's like a gap to gap hitter. I just don't like him that much, and I don't really know why. He's one of those guys that, like, to me, he's kind of like a Darren Erstad type, where you're like, you can just see as his career goes on, it seems like a lot of that's going to taper off. It's just a lot of the production is going to taper off. I might be totally wrong about that. Like he also could be kind of like a Charlie Blackmon, where, you know, he seems to produce at kind of the same level even as he ages. Like it declines a little bit, but not like he doesn't fall off a cliff. Like Charlie Blackmon has never fallen off a cliff, even as his numbers have declined with his age. Yeah. So, you know, if you end up getting a guy who becomes the next Charlie Blackmon, then you're happy about that. That's great. I just don't even know if he has that in him. So it's hard to say with Brian Reynolds, but that's a guy that fans have really loved for a long time, and I can see why.
He reminds me a little bit of like Michael Brantley is the guy that I would compare him to.
Yeah,
just
a little
kind
bit.
of does everything kind of well, but like is not like exciting in any way. So another guy, Ian Happ, plays for the Chicago Cubs. Came up as a second baseman, if I recall. Not that I don't know when he played Wait, did he? What? I thought he. Yeah, he was a second baseman early in his career. His first in 2017, he played a bunch of games at second base. He's been mostly an outfielder the last couple of years. Played some games in center, played some games in right, played some games in left. I think that's a guy that's got some value. He's on a 3-year, $61 million deal. He's in the first year of it. Makes a lot of sense to me. 29 years old. I don't know if the Cubs are looking to move him, but again, it's like what I'm saying is just go get these guys are all like, they're not really that different from each other. None of these guys I'm talking about, they're all like incomplete players. Like
I would say, yeah, I definitely get what you're saying from a talent standpoint, from a production standpoint, very similar. I think where the Mariners would see differences, Ian Happ is a $20 million a year player right now.
Sure.
Tyler O'Neill, by contrast, $5 million. I mean, to the Mariners, that speaks volumes.
I get what you're saying, and I know that they're like they've certainly been tight with the money, and maybe that's the case. Maybe, and you might even have information that I don't have, and I'm willing to acknowledge that. But I also think for the Mariners, the situation is different right now than it was in the offseason. Like what they're investing in now is more valuable than what you could have expected from the offseason. I think you would have expected Houston and Texas to both be better this offseason, and it would have been a much more competitive division. And now you're in a situation where you can start to really confidently shape this team for the playoffs. And it's just a different situation. I get what you're saying. Also, you're not paying. I mean, Ian Happ you're going to pay whatever his remaining, like, probably
you said
$12
he's
million.
got 3 more years left, or 2 more years left after this. So I mean, you're committing basically $50 million.
But you can budget that a little better than like trying to stick that all into this one season potentially.
I mean, this is that argument right there is why I feel like, even though I don't necessarily like Luis Robert as like the big splash because of his injury history, that's why I think the Mariners would sell out for a guy like Luis Robert, because he basically averages $15 million a year for the next 3 or 4 years, however much is left on his contract, which is an insane value. I mean, if you told me that the money was even on a guy like Ian Happ and Luis Robert, I would think you're getting a steal for Robert. But when he's actually $5 million less than a guy like Ian Happ, that's kind of crazy in today's market. So to think that you could go out and get a guy like that, it almost feels like the Mariners would want to sell out to acquire a guy like that.
Here's another guy that I think is exciting for a variety of. I only have 2 more guys to bring up. Paul Goldschmidt plays for the St. Louis Cardinals. He's having a down year this year.
He has been bad this year. He's not having a down year. He has been bad.
Well, it's come around a little bit. He's still like walks at a semi-decent rate. He has an 88 WRC plus. He's coming off of a 122 WRC plus, which followed a 176 WRC plus. So he's not that far removed from being a very, very, very good hitter. Does he turn it around this year? Does he not? I don't know. I mean, it started out really bad. I think that what I would say is if you could get, and he's also in the last year of his contract to like round that part out. So, and I
believe he's 37 years old, right?
He's in his age 36 season is what Fangraph says. Okay. Yeah. So
Goldschmidt feels like the interesting thing about Goldschmidt, he's been one of the most productive hitters at a position where you need a productive hitter for, the past decade, basically. And, even last year, it was declining a little bit, but it didn't seem like there were any real warning signs. And this year, for whatever reason, it seems like he has fallen off a cliff. And that when you're, if you're 30 and you kind of have one season where you fall off a cliff, you might be able to chalk that up as an aberration. When you're 37 and it happens, that's scary. I mean, the investment it's very low risk. Guy in the last year of his contract, doesn't cost a lot, a proven veteran who's been there before. I mean, all of those things are very attractive, but if you don't see signs of him turning things around, then it's a little terrifying.
Yeah, and actually, I say he had a better May. He was like a 98 WRC plus guy in May. So far in June, he's actually worse than he was in May. So yeah, I mean, you gotta see something to make you believe that he can still be a productive hitter. But he's also a guy that it's like, this is the kind of a player. Last year of his deal, if St. Louis decides they're completely out of it and they're going to sell, where you're probably going like it's a question of how much salary you want to take on versus which prospects you want to give up. And that's the kind of deal where I think the Mariners can acquire someone for 2024 who is as good as Vlad Guerrero. They could acquire 2 or 3 of these guys who are as good as Vlad Guerrero will be this year. What they kind of need. They need to really, and also, by the way, Alex like completely dropped off now. We're back in that mode. Maybe his modem arrived or whatever. But the Mariners need to acquire multiple of these guys, and also they need bullpen help. And I didn't even include bullpen help. I want to say that because every team's got a closer. Every team's probably got a quality reliever that you could throw into one of these deals, and it again becomes this like, how many of your mid-range prospects are you willing to give up? And you don't necessarily have to give up those top guys. Make small moves that make incremental improvements, as opposed to like a one big splashy move. That's where I'm at. Is I don't have a ton of confidence with this team. That I think they're gonna like for sure be a championship contender. And if they're not a championship contender, I don't necessarily want to sell out on it, but I also want them to be a contender for a decade. And I think the way you do that is to build through the farm system. And you know, anyways, I'm hoping Alex comes back, because I think what we have done is we have successfully talked about the Mariners long enough that not a lot makes sense to talk about. And I want to play the home run game with Alex. If you, by the way, I want to hear if you have anything to say. Go over to the YouTube chat, because I don't want to pull up multiple chats and have audio playing from a bunch of different sources. But also, one of the topics we wanted to talk about was Joey Chestnut got banned from the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. This is a contest, by the way, that's so far up its own ass. They have alienated or banned Kobayashi. They alienated or banned, alienated and banned Joey Chestnut. They're constantly at war with their stars. Oh, I think we have Alex back. You're back, Alex?
I was here the whole time. I heard everything. It was great points you made.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I can't tell if that's sarcasm.
You'll never know if I'm telling the truth or not. Okay, so you said Paul Goldschmidt. Who was the last guy that you had?
Oh, the last guy I had was Lourdes Gurriel, who plays for the Diamondbacks, and like a guy who's like, would be, by the way, feels like a very Mariners move. I will say, like a guy who's like a very mid-range. He's signed through 2026. Not exciting to me, but a guy who is, a decent hitter, and the Mariners have made a lot of trades with Arizona.
I'll give you 2 other Arizona Diamondbacks.
Okay.
Christian Walker plays
I like
first
the idea
base.
of Christian Walker.
He's 32, I believe. Super productive, but like under the radar productivity the last few years.
Sure.
Hits a lot of home runs. He's definitely a guy that's like, it's kind of home run or bust with him, but
Sure.
He's actually picked up his average in recent years. He used to be like a 190 hitter with 30 bombs, and he's more like closer to 250 now. So he's a good option. And then the other guy, another former Mariner, like Tyler O'Neill, Ketel Marte. Ketel Marte can play second base. He can play outfield. Sure. He's another guy that, I think you would need the Diamondbacks to really kind of like fall apart more than they have up till this point to be able to go get him. But the Diamondbacks are intriguing, not only because you've made these trades with them in the past, but conceivably they're going to want to part with Paul Sewald, and Paul Sewald's going to want to come back to Seattle if the stars align and the team starts falling out of contention. So, I mean, that's going to make, if you can swing a trade with one team and get both a relief arm that you need and a hitter, that's going to be very attractive. And
that's one of the things I said while you were gone, is I think I didn't even bring up relievers, because where I think the Mariners actually have their biggest deficit is their bullpen's terrible outside of Munoz. And I think they're doing everything, right? I can't remember the name of the kid that they're converting to a reliever, like a 12th round pick, that they're like, yes, you're good. Yes, you throw 98 as a starter. We need you to be a reliever like this year. The Mariners need relief help. Every team's got a closer.
Yeah, so you're talking about Logan Evans. Yeah,
Logan Evans. Yes. So the I do think that like every team, you can maybe throw in a decent quality reliever to supplement either side of that. And so like any one of these guys, these guys you talked about, I think Christian Walker's been on my radar because like as a prospect, he was always kind of exciting to me and always was putting up big numbers. And it's amazing to me that he's still in arbitration years. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, that system works against guys who are late developing prospects. That's for sure. I mean, you end up being, and this happened to Mitch Haniger a few years ago. He was basically, under club control until his 30s, and then the Mariners were able to just dump him. And now he's back, which happy ending, I guess. But I mean, I think the interesting thing about just as we get closer to the trade deadline here in the next few weeks, what is important for the Mariners to do is like really put some distance between them and the Rangers and Astros. If the Mariners can basically take out two teams at once, right? Because that's what you'd be doing. Like if the Mariners go on this real hot streak over the next couple of weeks, the Rangers and the Astros are going to be so far behind in the West that they're going to have no choice but to give up on this season. They're going to have to sell. And for both those teams, it's probably not a full-scale rebuild. They're both good enough to bounce back next year, no problem. In the Rangers' case, their pitching has been terrible. In the Astros' case, they've just been riddled by injuries. But, the Mariners are kind of in this nice position right now where other teams are still fighting for their divisions. If the Mariners can start to pull away over the next few weeks, they're going to have like a clear path to the playoffs without much competition in their own division, knowing that the AL West has been bad enough that the wild card hasn't even been a possibility for any of the runners up within the AL West. So the Mariners kind of have to win right now. And so the interesting thing about these trades, and we've seen this before with the Mariners, is they like to kind of jump the market a little bit and get in early and not wait until the deadline to make some of these deals. And so for the Mariners, like if you want to improve your team, do it now. Because if you do it right now, then by the time you get to the trade deadline in July, you don't even have to worry about the teams that are theoretically chasing you in Houston and Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, they will be out of the picture by then. And not only that, but you will have created two more sellers on the market to help kind of drive down costs. That's another thing. I mean, if you can drive down some costs by creating sellers, that's helpful too. So there's a lot at stake just over the next few weeks, even before we get to the trade deadline for the Mariners.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a team like the Diamondbacks, where it's like, or the Mets, like we talked about, if you can package a couple of these guys together and go get, if you could get Walker, Marte, and Sewald, I'd be more into the idea of giving up a top prospect for that package. And I think I don't know if Harry Ford plus some like ancillary non-blue chip prospects is enough to make that happen. I kind of think it might be, kind of in the same way that like the Mariners have done that in the past with I guess that's not the same thing, but like the way that the Mariners traded Jared Kelenic along with all these salary dumps. If you give up a prospect and you're allowing a team to get out from under some, this is all dead salary for them, right? Unless the Diamondbacks are gonna re-sign Christian Walker, who I believe he's in the final year of arbitration, so he can walk after this year. Unless they're gonna re-sign him, this is dead value after this year. Like there's nothing there, so they don't have a ton of leverage. And I think if you can, Marte's signed through 2027. He's 30 years old, and man, he is still making the Mariners look silly. He has been so good since going to Arizona.
God damn. I remember in the first year of Mitch Haniger, people thought we won that trade. The Marte for Haniger deal effectively, and no, we did not. We lost that trade, unfortunately.
God, he has been so good. Yeah, I mean, I guess in the case of Marte, like I'd be fine with giving up a couple of those guys for that deal, where you solve three immediate needs. You get like your DH / first baseman, Marte also, oh fuck, hold on. Now we're both off of camera. Hold on, Mike. Oh my God, Alex, what a fucking day. What a day of podcasting we have here.
It's been a day for sure. Also really quick, I just want to say this about, the perception of the trades that the Mariners could make. It's interesting because a lot of fans just don't want to give up certain prospects. So the guy recently that everyone's become married to is Colt Emerson. That's the guy. That's the name that we cannot part with. The Mariners don't have any prospects right now that are like consensus can't miss prospects. Like you could argue a few years ago, Julio was a guy that under no circumstances should you trade. In past, other guys that you've seen like that, other teams, Vlad Guerrero was that type of prospect. Jackson Holiday, more recently with Baltimore, was one of those prospects. Mariners don't really have that guy yet. The guys that they have that are very, very highly rated are either like a Harry Ford, who we all agree is probably expendable, or, you know, a guy who's probably a little bit too young to have that can't miss label bestowed upon him just yet. So if the right deal presents itself, fans are going to have to be okay with losing. You're going to lose somebody that you probably care about. If you're a real big Harry Ford fan, like, you better start adjusting your expectations, because he's probably out the door regardless. But with any of these guys, you're going to have to get used to the idea of them not being here if you want to see this team have a really prolonged run in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I guess that's the question is this the year, is this the roster that deserves to sell out on? And I think that, like, I agree that, like, the people who want to keep prospects, who want to hoard prospects, they have to be a little less tied to them. But I also think there are people who don't, like, care about the farm system at all, and anything that's not on the major league roster doesn't matter, and they have no foresight as to what, like, in 3 years when the team sucks, they're just not going to be following the team. So it doesn't matter to them. They just want to, and the Mariners have to fucking cater to those people too. So we've managed to make this an entirely Mariners focused episode. We got to do the home run game because I got to go pick up my kids. You probably got to go pick up your kids.
We got to do this. Yes, the home run game. I have a guy for you.